Okay, well, in order for you guys to see the jig and everything, I've got the camera pointed down, so my head may get cut off. That's okay. You're not here to see me. I'm a little disappointed Andrew couldn't give his pitch because I was hoping to build off what he did. So I'm going to have to make some assumptions that people know a little bit about making box joints already. I'm not going to go into detail about, making a box joint, I guess, because I'm sure Andrew is going to cover that with the home built jigs. So I've made homemade jigs myself, used those many times. They work great. They do take, you got to be careful with them to get them tuned in. And with this store-bought jig, it makes life much easier. So I'll show you more about that. First off, for anybody who's been living under a box and doesn't know what a box joint is, that's kind of what they look like. They're just straight pins, also called fingers, or finger joints, because they go together like fingers. And they're very easy to make, extremely strong. The only thing stronger is probably a dovetail, at least in one direction. That's why you make drawers, dovetail drawers, because of all the stresses of pulling the drawer in and out. Dovetails are very strong in one direction that the tails are pointing. I've got some other examples. This is one I made actually as a test with this jig, just for this demonstration. Just a little wine box, and it has finger joints in it. These are 1/8 inch, which are the same width as my table saw blade. And then this one you may have seen before. I made this box for my Stanley 45 plane and all the cutters and set. And I finger jointed this. This is an oak box, and the finger joints on this are 1/4 inch. So the main reason that I wanted to get this jig, which is the Incra Ibox Jig, and these sell for somewhere in the neighborhood of $200. You can get them at Rockler or Amazon. And the main difference is that, one, it's metal. So the homemade jigs that you usually make out of scrap wood, some plywoods, and wooden keys, can have some movement over time. You've got to make a miter slider for it. This one is all metal and adjustable. So when it sits in the track, it doesn't move at all. You can set the miter on the left or on the right slot for your table saw. It can also be used on a router table. And the other thing that I really like about it is that it's adjustable. So you can make finger joints from 1/8 of an inch up to 3/4 of an inch with using dado blades, and with very little readjustment of the jig. Whereas if you were doing the home built jigs, you'd have to make one for each size that you wanted to cut. Now, if you're not doing a lot of finger joints, that's probably okay. But if you want to be able to have the flexibility to do different sizes, or even there are some fancy ones that they talk about in the instructions, things like center keyed finger joints that have a larger finger in the middle of them, or slotted. They have some fancy slotted ones. I won't get into those. This also comes with the instructions. It's a big 12-page manual full of colored pictures that show you how to do everything. About half of those 12 pages, though, is how to get this initially set up and connected with your router table or table saw. So the actual instructions of how to use it are just a few pages. It also comes with a DVD, and this DVD is like an hour and 5 or 10 minutes long. And it goes into detail. It has an overview, how to set this up for the table saw, how to cut finger joints on the table saw, how to set it up for the router table and cut on the router table, and also how to do all the fancier joints. And so it's very nice. If you forget, you can just pull these instructions out and remember how you did it last time. So the jig is all anodized aluminum. It has some wooden guards, one on the back and one on the front, that are all adjustable and you can move them or take them off. There are T-slots on here. There's some plexiglass guard on the front. Covers up your table saw blade. Oh, by the way, I wanted to mention my table saw is unplugged, so I won't be using it for the demonstration. I'll just show you kind of how I would cut things. So there's lots of guards and things in place to keep your hands away from the sharp bits. And these T-tracks, I'm going to leave the guard off just so you can see what's going on down here. There's a backer board here. This is just a piece of 1/4-inch hardboard that's screwed on. And you can see there's multiple screw holes. That allows me to move this when I'm doing different cuts or different size cuts, to make sure that I have zero clearance here and to avoid blowout on the cuts. I think next time I make this, I'm going to make slots instead of holes. That'll give me an infinite amount of room to move this back and forth. You can also flip it. You can see there's a slot cut out of the top here. That's because I had it upside down before. So that way you can use this backer board over and over and over again until it gets torn up, and then you just throw another one on. So to initially set this up, these aluminum plates can slide in and out. You use just a Phillips screwdriver to loosen them up. You can slide them in and out. That gives you the space for the table saw blade. To set the height, you take your board you want and you can set it right on that little shelf, and then just crank up the blade until it's the same height as the board. And assuming all your sides are the same thickness, when you cut the slot, that slot will be equal to the fingers in the other board. And so the way you use this, there's on a homemade jig, you make a key here that the board, the slots in between the fingers sit on top of that key. And again, that key will be one size for whatever size joint you're cutting. This one contains 2 metal pieces. Try to hold it up there if you can see those. And those are adjustable. You can vary them in and out to get the different sizes. And what you do is you move those over until it just touches the edge of the blade. They call that the kiss calibration. And then using these knobs on the side, there's 2 concentric knobs here on the end. And then there's a knob on the top that's a lock. So you unlock it so you can adjust it, and then you turn the knobs to move the keys away from the blade. And as you're moving them away from the blade, they also separate. So the distance from the key closest to the blade is the same as the distance between the 2 keys. So it kind of goes like this as you move further away from the saw, they get further apart. And that way you can adjust the slot. And what you do is you take a board, make a test cut with your saw blade or dado stack, whatever you're using. Once you have that slot cut in the board, you can put it over the keys and adjust it until those keys fit that slot. And now your slot and the distance to the blade are automatically set to the proper distance. So it's just a matter of cutting the fingers. You start. So first of all, you start with your wood, and you want to have you figure out which pieces are, what side is going to be the top of your box, and you mark that. And normally you got 4 pieces, so you got 4 pieces, and all of them you want to mark a line, just a line to show where the top of the box is going to be, and that's your reference point, because you want the fingers to align properly. And on the first board, you take the line from the left side, slide it against the key, and cut your first slot. And then hop that slot over top of the key and cut your next one, and just keep doing that and moving it along, cutting each finger. And then you flip it end for end with the top indication still on the left-hand side, and you do the same thing, cut all those. And you would do that for two boards, 2 of the opposing sides of your box. And then for the other 2 sides, you take your first one that you've cut with the top indicator now on the right, and put that first slot over the key. And then your second board with the top mark on the left side, and butt that up against it. Cut that slot, and then you cut it just like all the other boards. You just hop it along as you go. And then again, you flip it end for end, and you do the same thing. Put your first board against there, start this one adjacent to it, and then hop it along and cut the fingers, just like you would do on a homemade jig. One of the things I did on this one, just for this demo, was I kind of eyeballed it to start with, and I cut some fingers. And this was the first attempt, and it fits, but it falls apart. It's very loose. And I measured so the gaps are always going to be the same, because that just depends on the width of your blade. But I measured the pins, which should be identical to the size of the gaps. And it turns out the pins or the fingers were 0.120. Now this is a 1/4 inch blade, so that's 0.125 wide, and this was 0.120, and it was really loose. So that's only off by 0.005 of an inch. Then what I did was I measured the gaps, and I found that the gaps were actually 0.130. So it's wider than the blade, which was, well, when I measure the blade, it's actually a little bit less than 1.25. So what that tells me is there's some run out in my saw. In other words, the blade wobbles just a little bit. So it's giving me a cut width of 0.130. So what I did was, using the knobs here, it's going to be hard to see on the camera, but there's actually graduations on that red knob, and you turn the silver knob that also has a little indicator on it, and each of those gradations is 1/1000th of an inch. So I cranked in 0.010 of an inch to go from 0.120 that I measured on the first cut to 0.130, and made the second cut. And that one went together perfectly. So again, that's one of the benefits. Yes, you have to pay $200 for this, but you can adjust it down to 1/1000th of an inch if necessary to get that fit as tight as you want it. And it's just extremely accurate. Let's see, what else do I have? One of the problems that I used to have was I would decide how tall I wanted my box. And so then I would calculate how many fingers and slots I would need for that height of a box. Then I would cut it, and I'd always end up with one finger that was like half a finger or a little sliver. It just never came out quite exactly what I wanted. I've learned since then that what you should do is decide how tall you want your box, and then make your stock like 2 finger widths more than that. Then you cut all your fingers and slots, and then when you get it put together, you can take it to the table saw or bandsaw and cut it to the exact height you want, or near that, but still have an integer number of fingers across there. And that makes the box come out looking a lot nicer than having one little tiny piece at the end. So I went through that pretty quick, but that is about it, unless there are any questions. Did I go too fast?
Yeah, Tom, there are a couple in the in the chat to kick it off. Richard's
Okay.
asking. Richard, do you want to go ahead and ask your question about what comes with the jig when you buy one?
Yeah, thanks. I'm up here now. Tom, thank you for the from the walkthrough on this. I'm not quite sure when you're talking about the sacrificial backing plate that you've got on there. Did one come with it, or did you have to make that? What do you get in the package, and what did you have to add to make it functional?
So like I said, you get the jig, you get the directions, you get the DVD, you get a little, they do give you a stock width chart to try and calculate, like if you want a 4-inch box with 1/4-inch pins, how many pins do you need to have? But I found that to be pretty useless. The backer board, I believe it does come with a backer board initially. Pretty sure it does. This one is one that I made extra. Let me just take a look at the directions here again. I've had this for quite a while. And to tell the truth, I don't use it all that often.
Mine did come with a backer board.
Yours did, Rick?
Yeah, I believe it did come with one, and they also give you a diagram of how to build your own with all the dimensions. So they're pretty easy to make.
So
You just cut the board to the right size and drill a couple holes.
So it comes with a fence. It also comes with that metal base plate.
Mhm.
Right, and the red covered front, the what you just moved over.
Yep. This guard,
Sorry.
and yeah, the metal base, the miter guide, the rear guard, and then this front guard. And these guards are very tall, and it's nice because once you put it on, it not only gives you a guard, protection from the blade, but you can snug it up against your board with a little bit of space, so that it actually helps to hold it vertical. As you're moving it along, it's squeezed in between the backer board and this guard.
Okay.
And another thing, they actually, in the video, they say to use a clamp, like a screw, or you can use any kind of clamp, but to clamp the board down. That way, it's not going to move at all as you're pushing it through the blade. It takes a little longer because then you have to loosen it, hop the board over, and then tighten it down again. But it doesn't take that much time, and it makes it more secure. Another little trick they tell you about in the video is what you can do is set your board on the jig, and then from the back of the backer board, you draw a line that you can see across the back of the board. And then that way, as you're moving it across, if that line is tilted at all one way or the other, it's very easy to recognize. And if you don't have it on the key properly and it's tilted, then your joint's going to be all messed up. So you want to make sure that it's flat down against the base.
Tom, could you do me a favor and put the key closer to the camera? I can't quite get an idea on what the key looks like or how it is embedded in there.
Let me grab a Phillips screwdriver real quick. Like I said, these base plates you can move in and out. Just make sure you have clearance from the blade. And this is what the key looks like.
Yep.
And when you unlock it, then when you turn the knobs, they go closer together or further apart.
Great. Thank you.
Cool.
One other thing, like I said, you can go down to 1/8 of an inch, which is the standard saw blade. You can't go narrower than that. So if you have a thin kerf blade, it won't work with this because the keys simply don't go any thinner than 1/8 of an inch.
Speaking of the keys, Bob raises a good point. What about with saw stops and the metal keys? Is it?
So the blade never touches the keys, except when you're doing the calibration. And you should have your saw off and unplugged when you're doing that.
Yeah.
So you move it into place like this. You raise the blade up, move it into place, and then adjust it with the knob until it just kisses that blade. And that's it. And then you move it back away from the blade by at least 1/8 of an inch. So the blade, you don't want the blade ever contacting either this base plate or the keys, or it'll be a bad day. And the nice thing is, once you've done that calibration once on your saw, say I cut a box with 1/8 inch fingers first, and then I want to do one with 1/4 inch fingers, I have to put in a dado stack. Well, since the dado stack is going to go, at least on this saw, the arbor runs out this way, so the stack will go to the right. When you move these keys, the keys are going to go to the left. So you don't have to recalibrate. All you have to do is change the spacing of those keys. And you should only have to do that calibration once.
Oh, cool. John has a question. He has his hand up. John?
Yeah.
John, where'd you go? Oh, there you are. I think you're muted.
How's that?
There you go.
Okay, I guess this could be for Tom or for anyone else that has made box joints before. I'm wondering, Tom, have you used this on a router table as well? And if so, does one method prove to make a better joint than the other, table saw versus router table?
I have made box joints using a router table, but I haven't done it using this jig to do it because I have a home built router table. It doesn't have a miter slot.
Mm. Well, even if it's not this jig, if it's even like a homemade jig, does the router make a better cut than the dado stack, for instance, or doesn't really matter?
It kind of depends. I mean, you'll get a cleaner bottom on it maybe,
Right.
but you also may get more tear out when it
Sure.
punches through.
Yeah.
Again, it depends on your backer board. This is for this test piece that I just have some Baltic birch, and it tore out
Mm.
pretty bad. I got junk all over that I haven't sanded. Another thing is the blade that I have. I've got just a Woodworker 2 blade on here that is not flat ground.
Yeah.
So I get what they call the bat ears,
Yeah.
like Batman, and it's not a straight bottom. They do sell blades specifically for box joints that are flat ground. Or
Thank
some
you.
dado stacks. Sorry, King?
Yeah, I have a question. In making, let's say drawers or something like that, I noticed you have, that's a serious amount of fingers. Can you get by with a half a dozen or so if you're doing something that's maybe 4 inches?
My drawers in my shop here that I made many years ago are actually finger jointed with some very large fingers.
Yeah.
Just because it was quick and easy to do. And they're just for the shop, so I didn't really care.
Yeah.
So I think I did 1/2 inch fingers on those.
Okay. I mean, obviously, the more fingers, the more glue surface. So I'm sure
Yeah.
the better, but.
I mean, those have held up for 15 years now with a whole lot of junk thrown in them. So.
Part of the downside with having a whole bunch of real small fingers is getting glue into all of them and then getting all 4 corners pulled together, clamped up, squared up and all that. So fewer fingers make that part of the process a little bit faster.
Yes.
Manageable, more manageable.
And what about the comparison of finger joints to dovetails? In drawers, I understand. It makes sense. Dovetails would be stronger, but is it absolutely necessary or not really? Or
It depends on how long you want the drawer to last, I suppose.
Well, I'm thinking of like the green and green drawers, George, you make, really just have essentially a couple of joints, right?
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
There are things like on those, you'll actually notice there's also a dowel pin or several dowel pins from the side, through the side into the front, the drawer front, that lock as well. The thing where I see the biggest, you get a mechanical strength from the dovetail joint because of the wedge shape to it. So the places I would see that being something desirable or something you might consider necessary is if you've got, say, a sideboard and the shallow drawers across the top is where all the silverware goes. That's heavy. If you slam that drawer, all that weight slides to the back and it acts like a hammer pounding on the back of that drawer. And likewise, when you pull it forward fast. Anytime when you have the contents of the drawer are going to be heavy, the added mechanical strength of a dovetail would be advantageous.
Oh, okay.
Outside of that, I mean, those are kind of unique circumstances, but I think in shops, I mean, I've got a lot of heavy stuff. I mean, I've got a 1 foot deep drawer that's got a narrow crown stapler and a brad stapler, and then all these boxes of all the fasteners. Well, those things
That's
are
heavy. Yeah.
It's heavy, yeah. So that kind of a scenario, either more finger joints or dovetails. And I actually did dovetails on these. So,
Okay.
but yeah, all the glue surface on the finger joints add a ton of strength.
This box for my Stanley 45, this 45 is pretty heavy.
Yeah.
But if you look at old style toolboxes, many of them have box joints on them. But I'm also not banging it around.
Well, the thing with a toolbox is too that you're picking that thing up and setting it down, and you might set it down cockeyed, one end first, so you're jarring all that weight. So you're putting a lot of stress on those corners. A drawer is a little more controlled circumstance there, but
Yeah, the bathroom cabinet I just finished, I did dovetails on, but I did them in the vertical direction. So any weight that goes in that cabinet, isn't going to bust out the bottom or pull the top off.
right.
One comment about glue up, Rockler makes sets of pawls of different widths so you can do all four corners, and then with the band clamps. And I've used those many times and it really works slick. It needs about 3.5 hands to get it all set up and aligned, everything. But once you do that, you just start tightening the straps down and it brings it all in and very square.
I used to have several sets of those in different sizes for different size fingers. The problem was I found that they didn't sometimes match up well with the fingers I'd cut, even though I cut 1/4 inch fingers and I had a 1/4 inch guide, they wouldn't necessarily line up perfectly. I think I ended up selling them because I just didn't use them that much. But if you have good luck with them, that's good.
My dado set is the Freud adjustable one, so I can dial in the finger widths.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
Quite precisely, and you can add just a little bit extra there to, and I use that mostly to be able to have an even number. If I've got a fixed board width, it allows me to have an even number of fingers and even sizes of fingers. Just takes a little bit of planning.
Just excuse me for a minute before my phone runs out of juice.
What are you saying, Rick? Your dado stack it has some kind of adjustment? I've never seen that.
Yes, Freud makes a dado set that you have a number of knives, but then you have adjustment of the overall space or overall width of the blade. To a certain extent, you just have the hub on it. You turn on that and it either increases or decreases the width of the cut. And, it's a lot faster a lot of times rather than, using paper spacers and all that in between your dado.
Yeah. Well, my set has, little, paper thin metal discs you can put in between, but to take that on and off each time until you've found your sweet spot.
Yeah, this allows you to basically just dial in whatever width of cut you want.
Rick, is that basically or similar to the wobble style dado cutters?
The what one?
The old version?
I don't believe so. No, it's, you know, it's a 6-blade set, and then you pick out, the blades are not all the same width. So you pick out, you know, they've got a chart for what width you want to end up with. And then you have a certain amount of adjustment, both plus and minus, for that cut. The only
Is it still
downside
cut flat bottom?
with that set is when they get dull, it's really expensive to get it all sharpened.
Yeah.
Hey, Rick, does that still cut a flat bottom slot too?
No, not completely flat bottom. Better than just running through a standard saw blade, but it's not totally flat, but pretty darn close, Jim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I bought the Freud box joint set, which is 2 blades that go face to face, and they cut either 1/4 or 3/8 inch dados. And then this will be more pertinent to Andrew's presentation, but then I built a sled for each of those 1/4 and 3/8. So if I want to, and I've got it set, so if I want to do 3/8 box joints, I go grab that sled off the wall, put it on the saw, put my pieces on, and start cutting, and it's already adjusted and ready to go. It works really slick. But if you want to go 1/2 inch, then you're starting from scratch because you can't adjust them. Then you're wishing you had what Tom's showing us. And Tom, what happens to your what happens to your sticker?
Flat bottom blade when this set came out. I've had this for, wow, probably at least 15 years.
Tom, what happens to your sticker collection when you leave behind you?
All of those stickers are on magnetic material.
Oh, no
Ah.
kidding. Cool. I'm glad to hear that. Actually, that's cool.
So they're movable. I didn't want to have
Great
to
deal.
deal with peeling them all off at one point. And I saw, actually I saw somebody else on Instagram who was showing that they put their stickers on. You just buy this flat, flexible
Magnetic
magnet
sheet, yeah.
material in sheets. And you put the sticker on it, cut it out, and got a magnet.
Very cool. That's good.
Yeah. Hey, Greg's got his hand up. Sorry, Greg, I didn't notice
No
it.
problem, no problem. I have the iBox and I have a confession to make that I've never watched the DVD.
Wow.
So, you had mentioned that the DVD shows that how you can make fancier joints. Are we talking about just double fingers or fingers inside fingers, or what kind of deal?
I actually didn't watch that part of the video. I watched the overview and they showed of what they were going to be talking about. Unfortunately, they didn't put pictures in the manual of those. They had one that was called a center key. So you have the whatever size finger joints you have, and then there's one large one in the middle.
Gotcha.
And then they had another one that they called a spline finger joint, which looked pretty cool. It had like a finger this way, a finger that way, and then it had a slot where like you could use a different colored wood to put that spline in. I can't describe it very well without a picture to show it, but it looks really neat.
Well, it's interesting enough to make me think I'd better watch that video.
The good thing about the video is it's broken into chapters, so you can select whichever chapter you
Oh,
want to work.
perfect. Yeah.
Well, Rick, have you seen the video?
13-inch TV and with a built-in DVD player in my shop, and it came in really handy when I started setting up the iBox Jig, because you could just go step by step and pause it and do that step. And that's the only thing I ever use it for, is watching instructional videos.
It's pretty smart, actually. Mike's got his hand up.
Yeah, can you feed 2 sides in of the same to make them? In other words, 2 ends of the box.
I suppose you could. Yeah. Yeah, there's no reason you can't, as long as you have a way to make sure you keep them together. This supports, I think it said up to like 1.5 inches stock. They said looks about right. So yeah, you can take the 2 pieces and push them up against the key and cut 2 at a time, especially if you're using a clamp. That would be helpful. And then, so one thing, I'll take that back a little bit. If you're using, this is, probably 3/8, 1/4 inch, or more, thick wood, that would work. I can fit 2 pieces and they both fit over the key, but that key isn't long enough to go any further. So if you're doing thicker stock, it probably would not work.
And it has to be a stackable dado and not an adjustable one.
You can use a dado stack, or you could use a wobble blade. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You can use either one. You just have to make sure your bottom plates are split far enough apart that the saw's not going to contact them.
Yeah, you're adjusting the jig to fit the cutter, not the cutter to fit the jig in that case.
Yeah, the one thing there that I guess would concern me is how you do, if you had a wobble blade, I'm not sure how you do the calibration correctly.
Have to rotate it.
You got to
Rotate
keep
it
that.
until
You got to
the,
keep that key up against the edge of the blade. You'd have to have the blade all the way to the tilt, side of the tilt to make that work. And by the way, it doesn't matter if this will work for a left tilt or right tilt saw. This miter can be moved to either side, and you can move these plates, like I said, back and forth. So it doesn't matter which way your blade is going, as long as you, as long as you set up the miter correctly.
Tom, as far as the idea of doing 2 pieces at a time, I understand that the key might not be long enough, but if you were to double stick the 2 pieces together, would you be able to do it without, without the second piece being on the key?
Yeah, probably could. You have the base there supporting it. You just wouldn't have the key to hold it. As long as the key is centering the back piece, that would probably work.
I'm not sure. I don't know if that would speed you up a whole lot or not, but by the time you fiddle around with the tape and stuff, you might be ahead of the game to just cut the pieces.
Once you get going, it goes pretty quickly. It didn't take me much time at all to do this box, and this has got, this has 15 fingers on it, and it's only like a 4.5 inch box.
Wow.
Would you tape those to keep the blowback down?
I'm sorry?
When you tear out, if you tape the cuts, would you save more wood?
I'm not sure I'm following the question.
Well, when you're running them through, if you put tape across them and cut through the tape, would you save more of the wood and not get so much tear out?
Oh, I see. I don't know. That'd be a good thing to try. I think if you're using the backer board, that should prevent most of it. Again, with the plywood's not the best, because you've got thin layers that are peeling off, and even these, when I've been playing with them, putting them together and taking them apart, they've chipped out and some of the pieces have broken off just from doing that. Using a solid wood, like a solid oak, oak's kind of rough because it likes to tear out too. But a solid wood would probably work better. I have done some using like a maple and walnut, so you have a contrast and you can really see the fingers well. I don't have it with me here, but that's another thing you can do. You do 2 sides in walnut, 2 sides in maple, and then you have a nice difference between them.
But Tom, every time you set up to do a new box, you have a new slot, you cut a new slot in your backer board, right? So you're always cutting so that should be zero clearance and should really limit the tear out. Yeah.
I would think clamping the piece to the fence securely might help a little bit of the tear out
True.
too.
Yeah. Rick's got his hand up. Rick?
Well, I was just what Jim just talked about, a fresh slot for every new cut really makes a difference. And the other thing is, I found that especially in harder woods, you don't clamp it, it'll tend to, sometimes your board tends to ride up kind of onto the saw blade a bit, and you don't get the full depth of the groove. And the clamping's a real pain. By the time you've clamped that many times, you get tired of it, but it seems to be the only way. I keep trying to figure out a way of using a toggle setup or something so you could just, automatically just slam it closed. But it's really important. The other thing I've done, I was making some espresso knock boxes for knocking out the grounds out of the cup for a company in Seattle. And the back of those was angled, so it came together as an angle. So I brought the finger joints in from each end, and I ended up with a nice dovetail right in the middle. It was kind of a head scratcher at first, and then it became a really neat detail.
That's cool. I don't know if you guys saw in the chat, Bob had mentioned he saw the manual, and it does have information about the saw stop, using it with the saw stop, so that's good.
Oh, okay.
Cool. Well, who else? Anybody? Well, for starters, who has one of these? Is there a decent amount of?
Sounds like Rick and Greg had one.
Yeah, I only could see 2 people.
I was fortunate. My client bought it and has never asked for it back. So
Nice. I had a friend who wanted a bunch of finger jointed. He's a machinist, and he wanted a bunch of finger jointed boxes to put all his machinist toys in. And I figured if I'm going to be making a lot of them, then I need something better than my home built jigs.
One thing that I have learned from working with Val Matthews on the Toys for Tots in his shop is his prolific use of the vice grip type clamps for a situation like this. It's, I don't know how to explain it other than it's a vice grip with like a C-clamp jaw that goes on to the board, and you can literally clamp it, tighten it, loosen it with one hand, and it's set to that right thickness every time you take it off and on.
Oh, those ones you adjust and clamp?
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. That'd be fairly easy to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to. I showed this one. That's what they show in the video, but I tend to use the quick clamps.
Yeah.
Squeeze on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, thanks, Tom.
Yeah,
Sure.
it'd be interesting to hear, to see the shop built ones from Andrew and kind of make a comparison.
Yeah, like I said, I've used those before too, and they work fine. They just, for me, they took a lot of tweaking every time I set it up.
Yeah.
And you'd have to do, instead of doing one test cut and adjusting to the width, I'd have to do a whole board and, well, 2 boards, and then try them and see if they fit. If not, then make an adjustment and do it again and again.
Yeah, I mean, I would say $200 is not a bad price for that. That's me.
And Incra stuff tends to be pretty good, generally speaking.
Yeah, I have their somewhere. I have their miter gauge for the table saw too.
Yeah.
How do you like that?
It's nice. I honestly, I don't use it that much, but then I don't use my table saw that
Oh,
much. I use my bandsaw for almost everything.
oh yeah.
But I got that at, I think it was an estate sale. I came across that one. It is nice because you can micro adjust it down to whatever angle you want.
Very cool. All right. Well, anybody else got questions, comments?
Comments, just thanks, Tom. I really enjoyed it. Appreciate
Hope-
you doing
Yeah,
it.
you
that was good.
learn something. I
Hey,
know I
Greg,
did.
when is part 2?
I'm sorry, I haven't set it up yet.
Oh, okay, we'll watch for an email then.
Yeah, watch for an email. I'm anticipating maybe a week or 10 days, something like that.
Sounds good, thank you.
All right.
All right, guys. Well, if there's nothing else, thank you, Tom. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Excellent info.